Good morning, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, this morning we are going to look at the whole fact of aid, right? So we hear a lot of times that the United States provides aids to foreign countries, particularly poorer countries, and Americans tend to think that these funds, these monies go directly to the country or to these, poverty-stricken countries, and that the United States is indeed helping these countries. And this has always been a controversial topic. And I think that we need to be enlightened about the topic, and we need also to enlighten ourselves because, you cannot learn more if you do not read and analyze for yourselves. People can sensitize you to information, but if you do not read the information for yourselves and delve deeply into those type of information, then you are not going to be able to understand these topics very well, right? And the topic of foreign aid is important because billions of dollars are often invested in these sort of aid that the United States and other countries say that they're doing. Many of these international organizations and these so-called philanthropic, organizations tend to, deceive you that they are really helping when they perhaps are not. And a lot of times when they say that they're non-profit organizations, they're NGOs, they are really corporations. They are for-profit organizations masquerading under the guise of non-profit. And you've got to really open your eyes and see that. And if you understood the Dark Ages, the period of Dark Ages, when the Catholic Church ran the show, when the Vatican, ran the show during that period of the Dark Ages, you'd understand how these people behave, right? Whilst the Catholic Church was collecting, lots of monies from its parishioners because they had to pay even for their sins. They had to pay penance and indulgences, right? Because whatever sin, and depending on the sin that you committed, you had to pay for that sin. And let's not talk about purgatory. When after you've died, the priest could come and say, well, that person committed that sin and is in purgatory, and we have to pray that person out. And if we don't get X amount of money, then that person will remain in hell forever, will remain in purgatory, burning forever. And that's a whole concept. That's where the concept of an eternal burning hell came from. God does not teach in the Bible an eternal hellfire, people burning in hell forever. That is not true. That's not God's word. In the same way, also, know when you die, people who are God's people do not go to heaven, right? Upon your death. That's why Christ is coming back to take home and also um, to impose, as you will, if you will, judgment on the large upon the population, upon those who are not his own, and that's when they will be burnt. But the Bible says that we will be burnt until it's finished. Hell is going to be finished because this earth is going to be hell. God is going to burn up this world, and then he's going to remake it. How will he remake it if it's going to be burned forever? Think about that, right? So there's no eternal hell, neither there's eternal heaven because God exists there, and the fact of the matter that God is eternal. But when you die, you do not go to heaven because why would Christ come back to take you home if you were already there? It doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. And another thing too is that when Adam sinned, he was living on the earth, right? God made the earth for men to dwell, right? For mankind, for the human family to dwell on the earth. If he knew, which he would have, which he would have known back then, because God presented to him the history of or the future of the entire world. He saw that. He saw that we would have, been rebellious because of his action, because of Adam's action. God gave him a sweeping view of the future, and he saw right down to the time when Christ would have come back, right, to claim his faithful ones. Now, so if Adam and Eve knew that they were going to heaven upon death, they wouldn't be in any way, you know, remorseful of their sins, because they know that heaven is paradise. Heaven is a wonderful place to be, right? Living with God's angel and living with God himself, right? But they understood that that was not so. The Bible says, from the dust that you were made, you shall go back to the very dust, right? So when man dies, he goes back to the dust. And as the Bible says, his soul goes back to God. But the soul does not mean a different entity. It means the breath of God that goes back, and your character, whatever you were as a person, goes back to God, because God is the judge. So books are kept in heaven, and all of the deeds that we have ever done are mentioned in those books, not for the purpose of God, but for the purpose of the entire universe to understand the reason why God has finally arrived at the judgment, which he will arrive at when he returns to the earth. But that's a different conversation. We're talking about aid, and we're wondering, does aid really go, do these funds go to the countries as they are alleged to do? Now, yesterday I was listening to this speaker, this author, Jake Johnston, and he's a U.S. author. I think he works for some organization in Washington, D.C. Let me just put up his name and see if I can get some, basic information on Jake Johnston. Jake Johnston. Now, as I'm searching for this, it's very important that we understand that there is a lot of deception in the world, right? There is a lot of deception in the world, and we've got to find ways and means of educating ourselves, which is not going to be an easy task right now, given the fact that many of us find ourselves in situations where we're already deceived. We have already been deceived. Now, it says here that he works for the CEPR, that's Jake Johnston, Senior Research Associate. Jake Johnston is a Senior Research Associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C., right? So Jake Johnston is a Senior Research Associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. Jake Johnston has a BA in Economics from Boston University and an MA in Writing from Johns Hopkins University. And we have at CEPR, rather. His research has focused predominantly on economic policy in Latin America, the International Monetary Fund, and U.S. foreign policy. He is the lead author for CEPR's Haiti Relief and Reconstruction Watch blog, and his articles and op-eds have been published in outlets such as the New York Times, The Nation, The Intercept, Le Monde Diplomatique, Boston Review, and Al Jazeera. His book, and this is what you can buy, Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti, is now available from St. Martin's Press. So the title of his book is Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. So he was being interviewed by this particular podcaster, and we're going to listen to a brief clip of what he had to say. Now, I am also showcasing him and also wanting my fellow audience to listen to briefly to him, because I was making the point, expressing to one of the Dominican commentators online about the fact that the Haitian crisis is our crisis, is the Caribbean's crisis, is the world's crisis. It's our problem too, right? While we might not be directly affected by it right now or impacted negatively by it right now, it is going to have serious consequences upon our how global governance is organized and is practiced around the world, right? And we've got to understand that. So I was making the point to her that yes, Dominicans need Haitians and Haitians need Dominicans, right? Haitians need Dominicans in the sense that they have a stronger economy. So they come here and they access their, jobs and also certain social services. Now, the Dominicans need Haitians because that is how their economy grows, right? They have had a strong economy because they've had a lot of cheap and free Haitian labor, right? So I wouldn't say it's a win-win situation because it's not solving the problem of Haiti. And in some cases, neither the Dominican Republic, because the Dominican Republic, their citizens complain that they cannot get a job. Why? Because the Haitians have supplanted them, because their labor is very cheap, and Dominicans do not want to work for such low wages. So that is a loss for them. A lot of them are not gainfully, a lot of Dominicans are not gainfully employed in their so-called strong economy, right? And this is where the crux of the matter lies. This is the paradox of everything. This is a conundrum. Now, let's look at what the Jake Johnston has to say about, his book briefly. Aid State, let me put it back where I have the title of the book here. It was the title of the book again, Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. Sounds like a book that you want to read. However, before I even allowed you to listen to him, I was a bit, struck at the end of the interview, towards the end of the interview that I'm about to show you, when the question was asked by one of the listeners of the program, of the podcast, what role do the Clintons play in Haiti's crisis, in the Haitian crisis? And he was almost, defending them, and I thought it was interesting that he was defending them in terms of behaving as if, that they were naive and they gave money to people who they thought would have helped, and the people did not help, and had they been able to perceive that these people were phony, and that they were not going to do what they had pledged to do, then perhaps, it would not have befallen them. Their money would not have gone to waste. But that was not the only Clinton scandal. There are so many scandals surrounding the Clintons which suggests the same way they have always behaved in the same way. Nothing new under the sun. What they did to Haiti in 2010 after the earthquake is what the Clintons are known to have always done, right? So the whole question about his trying to defend the Clintons, I found to be a little bit off. And then he himself was not able to express clearly what he was saying. It was almost like a made up thing about, his defense of the Clintons for what they had done. As if they were just naive, and had they had 2020 vision, they would have done differently. Can't accept that, I'm sorry. And the Clintons have been in Haiti, that's where they honeymooned, right? So they have been there, from perhaps the 60s, 70s. They have been in Haiti, and they know the length and the breadth of that country. They've done some terrible things there that I would not like to disclose at this point. But let's go to the video and see what he has to say about how aid and funds, particularly going to Haiti, are treated.
Capitalism and the battle of control for Haiti. I just want to say thank you, Jake, for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that off the top of it, it's a phenomenal book, well researched. I think you write really compelling stories of folks, not only of the everyday folks that live in Haiti, but also of the government officials, and kind of tell this, the story of, again, elite panic and culture, and kind of the story of how donor classes and corporate interests have kind of really had a hold on both Haiti as a state, its culture. And to start off, I wanted to ask, you're a guy who's originally from Portland, Oregon. You live and work in DC. What is it about Haiti and that inspired you to write not only this book, but motivates you to do the kind of work that you do with the Center for Economic for the Center for Economic and Policy Research over at DC?
Yeah, well, first, I think, my friends from back home in Maine would be a little offended by the Oregon thing. So I got to correct the record. It's Portland, Maine.
Oh, sorry. Portland, Maine, I apologize.
Not at all. But yeah, I mean, it's, for me, this started a long time ago, right after 2010, the earthquake in Haiti. And, I was working for a place in DC, and I think, a lot of credit goes to my colleagues who recognized really early on at the time that the decisions that were going to be made about the future of Haiti were going to have as much to do with what was decided in Washington as in Haiti. And so, we started doing this research, and for me, it was really a window into U.S. foreign policy, right? And that was what I was studying at the time. That's what I was working on. And in Haiti, it just sort of smacked you in the face. Nothing was up beneath the surface. It was just right there. And so you could really see these mechanisms, the soft power of the US and how it wields this influence and how the sort of, massive bureaucracy of the US government actually functions in foreign countries like Haiti. And so it really just started there and never stopped. Right. So here we are 15 years later, and, in so many ways, it's still that, right? International actors are still a really dominant force in Haiti's politics and their economy. And so, it's not just about that anymore for me, right? Over time, spending time in Haiti, traveling there, meeting friends, it became about much more than that. It became about Haiti itself, the culture and the people and everything like that. But, it's still at its core is, for me, a window into U.S. foreign policy that we don't often get.
And so, in the beginning of the book, you give the reader kind of this comparison that's really interesting to me. You compare kind of like the the evacuation of Afghanistan with that, and like it's kind of like the nation building aspect of Afghanistan with that of Haiti, and how does our understanding of good foreign policy in the nation of Afghanistan inform us as as citizens of how we should be understanding how U.S. foreign policy operates in the nation of Haiti?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to draw that parallel right off the bat because I think, Afghanistan is something that most people are familiar with. They sort of understand that they've seen it, right? It's been such a huge part of US foreign policy for the last 2 decades. And there's sort of an acceptance that this was a failed effort at nation building in Afghanistan. That's penetrated into the sort of mainstream thinking and analysis around this issue. And yet, when everyone was looking at Haiti, when I was seeing coverage of Haiti, it was, oh, this is just a failed state. This is just some backwards country that can't govern itself, right? And there was no recognition of the role that foreign policies had played in that. And yet, for that whole time that Afghanistan was under US military occupation, there was a foreign military occupation of Haiti as well. And that one was really beneath the radar, right? And it wasn't always US troops. US troops were the initial initiators of it, but were replaced by UN peacekeepers. And so it was 10,000 UN troops, not
Right.
American troops that were on the ground. And so I think for the general US audience, that issue never really penetrated or reached that sort of level of understanding where Afghanistan did. And so I think it's, this is not Afghanistan, right? It's not an isolated event. This sort of imposition of a state is something that we've done and we've had a hand in as a United States all over the world for a very, very long time, right? And so I really just want to highlight that as a way for people to understand that this isn't just a book about Haiti, right? I mean, it's focused on Haiti, but this is a book about the ways in which U.S. foreign policy actually affects people on the ground, be it in Haiti, Afghanistan, or anywhere else in the world.
And to kind of further that idea about U.S. foreign policy, early on in the book, you write about a report that's filed by Cheryl Mills, who was chief of staff to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and under President Obama, they wrote a report about the effect of U.S. aid and it's reaching how far it reached into Haiti in regards to certain aspects of the state. And can you talk about like how far it reached, and how it didn't, and just kind of like what failures kind of arose in that report?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the first thing to understand, right, is that this wasn't a new dynamic, right? This wasn't just about the response to the 2010 earthquake, which was devastating, up to hundreds of thousands dead. The world pledged $10 billion to build that better. But the problem with NGOs and foreign aid didn't start then, right? So even at the time of the earthquake, Haiti's public services had largely already been outsourced. 70-80% health, education were in the hands of private actors, NGOs, stuff like this. And that's largely what this report from Mills and from the State Department was getting at, was that our foreign assistance hadn't really been effective. Right? We were spending tons of money, but we weren't building anything sustainable or lasting. And in fact, it was predominantly enriching U.S. companies who were the biggest beneficiaries of aid money. And this is, one of the ways in which I really sort of entered this question and the issue of Haiti and U.S. policy after the earthquake was trying to answer the question of where did the money go, right? I mean, $10 billion in pledges, yet we're hearing all this stuff from people on the ground. There's this huge disconnect between the pledges and what we're actually seeing on the ground. Why, right? What was happening? And it was shocking to me, right? I mean, I think I later learned was everyone sort of already knew this in the industry, but shocking to me as an outsider was that most of that money was going to organizations like closer to my office in Washington, D.C., right? Just around the block, even. It wasn't going to companies or organizations in Haiti. It was going to the Haitian government. And in fact, 99% of post-earthquake aid bypassed the government and Haitian entities entirely. Only 1% went to local entities directly. And so you can really see how this not just erodes the state, but I think had longer and bigger implications over time, right? And I think, for me, it started with where did the money go, and ended with why was the money going there in the first place.
Okay, only 1% of the donations that were sent from the United States, the billions of dollars, I think it was, $10 billion, I think, that was, made for the Haitian relief crisis after the earthquake had struck in Haiti. And to think that only 1%, some books that I've read or some articles I've read suggested that it might have been 2%. But, whether 1% or 2%, that's a minimal, level in terms of the amount that was sent, a minimal amount. And something to think about, to understand that the government was not the recipient of these funds, right? And that they went to private sectors and private interests, right? And as he suggested, as Jake Johnston suggested, that the people in Washington, D.C., who were responsible for, I guess, divesting the funds, they're the ones who the funds actually went back to. And I've seen a number of them in Santo Domingo and, behaving as if they're helping Haitians. And I know that they weren't helping them, that they were representing NGOs, right? Non-governmental organizations, and pretending to be generous and philanthropic. And this is the facade that we often see when we hear about these NGOs and these philanthropic organizations. And I hope you understand that many of them, the large majority of them, I'm not saying all of them now, because there are some decent people and some people who have started their own organizations, and they are decent and morally upright people. And they do provide services to the Haitians, but that is in the minority, right? The majority. In fact, Haiti is known as the Republic of NGOs at this point of the game, right? They are known, and that has been for years, as Jake Johnston has posited. Even before the earthquake, many of the jobs, many of the services, the Haitian services that should be attached and linked to the government, right? Because the government, that's why the government is there, to provide these services. They had already been outsourced. And the United States need to also take a warning, because a lot of their services also are now being outsourced, right? Where that's why you find that a lot of them are now, very expensive, because it's for profit services. It's not, a service that is offered to you by the government through taxpayers paying their taxes, right? So even though you have to pay your taxes, U.S. citizens, a lot of your services are also being outsourced to other organizations. And even if there are American companies, remember that American companies, other people have shares in them, Chinese shares, European shares. Our world is so interconnected and so globalized, right? That nothing you think, you can't talk about a pure US company, right? It's a hybridized company that can have shares, many people from different countries and vice versa. In Haiti, maybe there are problems. Sure, there is not, right? There's no uh, organization that is purely Haitian, right? It also has investors from other countries. And that is why we have most countries are on board with the US because remember now our countries are controlled by economic interests. They're really corporations, and you have to understand that. Our countries are not free countries and free entities and public institutions as you have been told, right? They're really private corporations. And it's the next bidder, the one who can give you the highest bid and also the most money that will definitely run the show. And at this juncture of our history, private corporations and among other institutions, higher than the corporations, because a lot of times we hear about, oh, it's the corporations, but there are also other higher institutions and organizations that control these corporations. And you've got to understand that, right? You've got to understand that. You have to look at the hierarchical structure of the global elites. I think we have been using this a lot of time, the global elites, and you've got to understand that is so. Now, there's an article I read yesterday, which I found interesting, and I think I would like to share some of the thoughts. And I think he might be Haitians with you. He might be a Haitian rather. Let me see if I'm always having problems with this mouse getting back it. Yeah. All right, so let me see if I can get the article that I read yesterday. And because the guy here was thinking and he made some very, very important points. So let me share my screen with you to for you to be able to see what I'm. So share screen. Yes, and the article is there. So we can see here the Kingston, that this was the emergency CARICOM meeting held in Kingston some weeks ago. So US imperialism, that's the title of the article. Get out and take your presidential counsel with you. And this is a sentiment, the name of the author is Berthony Dupont. Now, he says here, a French saying goes, those who resemble each other always end up flocking together, right? And we say in English, birds of a feather flock together, right? So these guys are here and they represent the same, right? Attitude toward Haiti, that of control, that of domination, right? Because that is what imperialism is all about. People are still asking, why is the US in Haiti? Because the US wants to control the world, right? And I've said to you that the US is on a quest for full spectrum dominance. And you've got to look, when you look at the news, that's what you have to see. If you have that, implanted in your brain, you can see through everything that they're doing. But most of you have not yet come to grips with that reality. You don't want to come to grips with that reality until the soldiers, until the troops end up at your house and they treat you like a dog. But that is what you have to understand. He says that traditional Haitian political figures who have flocked to the Transitional Presidential Council, the CPT, that US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken cooked up. And I like the word cooked up. That's what it's all about. They cooked up this thing with the aid of a few lackeys from CARICOM in Kingston, Jamaica on March 11. All have the same class instincts and nurse from the same imperialist teeth, right? And this is what we have to understand, right? Now, he's also quoting from a Haitian proverb, which says they are just crabs in a basket, right? And in Jamaica, we say they are crabs in a barrel. Right? So the Haitians use crabs in a basket. And in Jamaica, their proverb is that people are crab in a barrel, right? Everybody wants to be packed in that barrel, sapping at and climbing on each other, finding it easier to tear each other apart rather than to agree on any issue that concerns the nation. So this presidential council is not about the Haitians. It's about control. It's about expanding their imperialist quest for full spectrum dominance. Now, what is hidden behind the CPT, that's the council, the Presidential Council, is perhaps even more scandalous than we think. It is not simply the flip side of a neocolonial coin, similar to the Republican-Democrat alternation that is used to fool and distract the American people. And he's using this because, and this is important for Americans to understand, that this Republican-Democrat alternation is to fool you and to distract you. And many of you, when I speak to you, you are still defending the virtues of republicanism and being a Democrat. Right? Well, you should defend the virtues of republicanism, but not the Republican Party. Now, you can use both parties because you know that they're controlled and you can use them to achieve your own purpose. But at this juncture of the history, we know that the Democratic Party is lost. It's gone, rotten to the core, and nothing that they do is good, or nothing that they say. Due to the Haitian masses' militancy, Washington has had to resort to this collegial formula a few times in the past 4 decades. In 1986, after Baby Doc's overthrow, they formed the infamous Neo-Duvalerist National Council of Government, that's the CNG, which went through several iterations before boiling down to 2 murderous generals, Henri Namfi and Williams Regal. Right? So we see here history being repeated, and that's why we have to study history, because history, there's nothing new under the sun. Right? If something stops here, it's because there was some setback, some hurdle, and if we become unaware of the history, then the actors will continue. And then you and I are going to be deceived, thinking that we're living in a civilized society when we're not. Washington can only perform this cheap, hard trick once again, 2 decades later, due to the decay of the nation's institutions and the decrepitude of its political life, a fragile stage which the US has worked to create so it can experiment on Haiti with its Global Fragility Act. So what is happening in Haiti right now is an experimentation. And I've told you before on this channel, that the United States is testing the waters in terms of how it can apply its Global Fragility Act on Haiti, which eventually will be exported to all nations around the world. All right? So look at Haiti as the experiment lab, right? Now, listen to what he says. This bipartisan project, because it is both Republican, Democrat, it came from them, passed in 2019 under Trump's presidency. So he's no different from the other presidents, right? Because that is what he's put there to do, to expand America's military and their war agenda. Now, it seems to me that he was a little bit hesitant to fight a lot of the wars, and they might not necessarily want him. He doesn't seem to be the warmonger. He just wants to have the attention to be on him and what he's doing in the United States. He wants to be the man and not for them to talk about wars. In fact, he wants America's media to talk about him, right? That is Trump, right? Has a lot of ego and completely destroy our, well, where did I stop? So Trump's presidency aims to establish a US military base in Haiti. So under the Trump presidency, there was an attempt to establish a US military base in Haiti and completely destroy our agricultural production, making us dependent on a lifeline of, you said, humanitarian aid, which is simply excess US agricultural output, which means that a lot of them times it's rotten to the core. And recently we learned that, some black rice, was sent to Haiti, rice that should have been thrown outside. But that is how the US operates. Now, he mentioned something here. Look at what he's mentioned on a time frame here. So now it looks like Washington will have to, once again, as it did in 1994 and 2004, lead France and Canada in the 3rd foreign military intervention into Haiti in 3 decades, right? And he's looking at the timeline of what they're setting up here. On March 24, compatriot John Robert Sinus tried to sail to Lagonav, but was turned back by 7 U.S. Marines in a Zodiac boat, which had come from U.S. Navy vessels stationed in Port-au-Prince Bay. Last week, Southcom's General Law Richardson stated that the Pentagon is prepared with a broad range of contingency plans, right? So it also looks at the Global Fragility Act template is getting an early start. We have learned that former U.S. Marine John Mansell has been named executive director of Washington's HAITI Interagency Working Group. Previously, he was Assistant Secretary General for Operations of NATO and is a professor of practice at the Joint Advanced Warfighting School, known as JAWS. So they have a Joint Advanced Warfighting School. Didn't know of that school. So they have school that teaches these people how to war, how to kill people, right? Without any feeling of remorse. Something you need to understand that. The Haitian people must take to the streets in massive numbers to say no to imperialism and its henchmen. Let us fight for the unconditional defense of Haiti's sovereignty against the US, Canadian, and French troops, which are poised to pounce, and they are going to pounce this time. I can tell you that. So Haitians have to be prepared for such an invasion. So there was another article that was, was written sometimes, and it's called this is a paper online or magazine titled The New Humanitarian. And this was written by Daniela Moore, and she's a Latin American editor at large based in Santiago, Chile, right? So she's writing a transitional presidential council is taking shape in Haiti, even as rampant gang violence spreads into wealthy areas of the capital amid lingering divisions over the best path forward, notably over the deployment of a largely US-funded security assistance mission. So we have seen that, she's talking about increased violence, even though the transitional government is in the process of being created, of being formed. I don't know, what is happening to that presidential council. We do know that that is not going to solve the problem, because that is a bogus and that it is a charade, as other writers have suggested. Now, the council faces opposition, that's the presidential councils, from Haitians supporting former police chief, senator, and paramilitary leader Guy Philippe, who reportedly has his eyes on the presidency. Former Senator Jean-Charles Moïse, one of Philippe's key allies, rejected CARICOM's plan and a seat on the council, insisting that they would set up a separate 3-member one of their own choosing. And it's interesting why Guy Philippe was not present in Kingston. Well, he's opposed, according to him, to that presidential council. And I would think that the CARICOM leaders are aware of his opposition to such a move. Now, we as humanitarian actors do not have access to those people due to fuel shortage and roadblocks. Bobby Sander, country director at Food for the Hungry, a Christian aid organization, told the New Humanitarian. And by the way, there is a lot of hunger in Haiti because of the gang warfares, right? It means, therefore, that seems like some of the ports are actually blocked from sending food to the people. I haven't read this article yet, so I'm just going through and selecting statements that made. Haitians don't believe in their country anymore, he said. They don't believe in their leaders, with good reason in some cases, but we need to change all this. We need to restore the trust. For that, we can't have other people coming to decide for the Haitians. And that is a very, very sad reality. When people begin not to trust their own government, right, then you are going to have anarchy. And it's going to be as disastrous and as catastrophic as what we're seeing in the land of to solve global cure. Now, this is what I just wanted to bring to you. I just wanted to let you know that the Haitians are not in control of what is happening in Haiti, right? And when donations are made, and lots of times Dominicans tend to think that the monies that have been sent, and Americans too, and perhaps people from other parts of the world, think that the donations made to Haitians through these multinational organizations tend to go to Haiti. But many times they do not, and they end up there, and perhaps sometimes they don't, right? They still remain in Washington, in Brussels, wherever they are, wherever these monies are sent, they remain in the country. They stay in the coffers of these private industries and firms and corporations, right? So it's for us to understand that only 1% is received by the government and private sector organizations down there. I would think, however, that there are other, it's much more than 2% or 1% that is received by the private sector of the Haitian society, right? The Haitian private sector organization. I'm sure that they receive much more than that, right? Because they are closely aligned with these corporations and these governmental institutions because the elites work together, right? You need to understand that the elite, the global elites work against the normal populace. For you to understand that. So when you say the US or when you say Haiti, you've got to be very careful. You've got to ask, who are you talking about? Whom are you talking about, right? Are you talking about the elites or are you talking about the populace, the population? You've got to really, really make that difference. And many people still aren't able to make that difference. They think when you talk about Haiti, you're just talking about, you're just putting everybody into one box, right? But the elites do not consider themselves to be a part of the masses, right? They are the real globalists. They can live anywhere, right? Because they have, passports, they have their visas to other countries. Sometimes some of them have the citizenship to other countries, so they are able to move back and forth, while the people have to remain, many of them, in the mess that they have created. Right? So it's time for us to understand that. And our politicians, whether be they American, be they Jamaican, be they Haitian, be they British, are not working in the interest of the larger populace. Time for you to wake up. Time for you to smell the coffee. Time for you to understand that when you vote, you're not necessarily voting for your interest, right? You're voting in the interest of the economic and financial needs. Thank you so much for joining. Hope that you have learned something today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. All the best to you. Bye.